And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. Looking at the sea ice, it's still rather extensive throughout the northern half of the Bering Sea, with areas of ice down into Kuskokwim Bay, even a little bit lagging in through areas of Bristol Bay. And there's still the potential for some of this ice to drift just a little southward, as there is going to be some colder air that's in place now along the west coast. We expect temperatures to average a bit below normal here along the west coast through the end of this week and at least into the upcoming weekend. Late tonight into Wednesday morning, we're going to have an area of low pressure approaching the central Gulf, and another front lifting northward will enhance some snowfall in northern parts of the Panhandle. So several inches of snow could fall, especially west of Haines along the Haines Highway toward Chilkat, maybe as much as 4 to 7 inches of accumulation there, with an inch or two in Haines itself. And some stronger winds tonight, early Wednesday, along the southern and western outer Panhandle coast. Prince of Wales up to Sitka could see some wind gusts 40 to 50 miles per hour. Back to the west, we have another low and frontal system working its way across the lower Bering and the Aleutians. On Wednesday afternoon, we have the low up into the Gulf with that front just kind of pressing northward, and a couple other impulses of low pressure rotating back to the north and west. Meanwhile, the frontal system and lows out over the Aleutians will continue to slide off toward the southeast. And by Thursday, we have a low pressure system south of Kodiak Island, with a trough extending ahead of it. Again, the weather systems will be mainly impacting areas along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle for the end of the week, into the weekend. And kind of a stationary front off to the west, that'll tend to wash out, and there'll be a weak low forming off the Lisburn Peninsula into the Chukchi Sea by the time we get into Friday. So the marine forecast for the southeast Panhandle on Wednesday, we could see some gale force gusts to 35 knots from the southeast, Dixon Entrance and Stevens Passage. Waves could be as high as 10, 13 feet, Dixon Entrance, 3, 4 feet there, Stevens Passage. 4-foot waves within Lynn Canal with north winds of 20 knots. For the outer coast on Wednesday, we're looking at generally southeast winds 25 knots off of Craig and Sitka, 40-knot gales out of the icy strait, and then 25 to 30 knot easterly winds up along the northeastern Gulf Coast with waves 12 to 14 feet. On Thursday, still north winds Lynn Canal, 15 knots, waves 2-3 feet. Southeast winds central southern parts of the Panhandle with 15 knots, Stevens Passage, and 3-foot waves, and southeast winds 25 knots with waves as high as 10, 11 feet in the vicinity off of Ketchikan and Metlakatla. We could have 40-knot southeasterly gales off of Craig there on Thursday with waves up to 14 feet. Those winds then become more easterly from Sitka on up through Yakutat at 25 knots and as high as 35 knots there off of Cape Suckling with 10 to 12-foot waves. On Wednesday for the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds will be just southwest of Kayak Island outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. We're looking at northeast to east winds 25 to 30 knots. Within Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots, waves 3 feet. As we drop down through Cook Inlet, upper middle Cook Inlet, 10 to 20 knot winds out of the north, 3 to 5 foot waves, and winds try to turn a little more easterly once you get down toward Kamishak Bay and Kennedy Entrance with waves of 4 to 5 feet. So with that low taking shape into the central Gulf on Thursday, winds are going to strengthen. Cape Suckling, Kayak Island to outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and off the eastern Kenai coast, east-northeast gales of 35 knots, waves 10 to 13 feet. And then for the area of Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. Cook Inlet will see north to northeast winds 25 knots off of Anchor Point and down through the lower portion of the inlet to Kennedy Entrance with waves of 6 to 7 feet. On Wednesday, to start with Kodiak Island, variable winds just 10 knots. As we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, look for easterly winds 15 to 20 knots as you get off of Sand Point, Cold Bay, and False Pass. Waves 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 2 to 4 feet on the Bering side. On Thursday, with low pressure near and east of Kodiak Island, Winds will be northeast to north at 20 to 25 knots, but across the Alaska Peninsula, winds turn northwesterly 20 to 25 knots on the North Pacific side and 15 to 20 knots on the Bering side. Waves generally 5 to 6 feet, though locally higher off of False Pass as high as 8 to 9 feet. It'll be brisk across areas of the Aleutians on Wednesday. We do anticipate winds over the eastern Aleutians 25 to 30 knots, generally out of the west. Once you get around Atka through Adak, we have gale force winds there westward, looking at west-southwest gales 35 to 40 knots with waves as high as 25 to near 30 feet on the North Pacific side, especially there south of the central Aleutians and south of Kiska. For Thursday, as low pressure slides southeastward, winds turn northeast or northerly across the Aleutians. 25 to 30 knots generally the rule, though there could still be some 35-knot northeasterly gales west of Adak through Kiska and Shemya on the North Pacific side. For the areas of the southwest coast, we have northeast winds 20 knots out of Bristol Bay, northeast winds 15 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, and then north to northeast winds out of Norton Sound and down along the lower Yukon coast. Look for northeast to east winds 20 to 25 knots from St. Matthew down through the Pribilovs at St. Paul and St. George. And for Thursday, generally speaking, north-northwest winds around 20 knots, St. Paul and St. Matthew, as well as through Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. For areas along the lower Yukon Delta and on up through Norton Sound, look for north winds of 15 to 20 knots. So there could still be some southward drift of the ice. And keep in mind, too, the cold air that's in place along the west coast will remain so through the end of the week into the upcoming weekend. Through the Bering Strait on Wednesday, we're looking at north winds 15 to 20 knots all the way down through the north side of St. Lawrence Island. Strongest winds along the Chukchi Sea coast will be off of Wainwright and Cape Lisburn at 30 to 35 knot east to northeasterly gales. Along the Beaufort Sea coast, we're looking at easterly gales of 35 to 40 knots, especially from around Nuex at Dead Horse through Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. This is the area that will experience reduced visibility and blowing snow Wednesday into Thursday. By Thursday, winds start to come down in a few areas, though still 40-knot easterly gales in the vicinity of Kaktovik, so blowing snow could continue into the day on Thursday in the far eastern part of the Beaufort Sea coast. As we drop down from Utqiagvik to Wainwright, winds 25 falling off to 15 knots off of Point Lay and Cape Lisburn. And then the lower Bering Sea before the Bering Strait, kind of a mixed bag, variable winds around 5 to 10 knots before turning northerly through the Bering Strait. Along the west side of the Seward Peninsula and the north side of St. Lawrence Island, we're looking for northerly winds of 15 knots on Thursday.